Hi, my name is Mark Lynn, and I'm the roommate coach. You're listening to KZZH FM 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This will be episode number 23 of the Roommate Coach. I'm calling this a little bit of skepticism. The title refers to an article I saw recently about coliving, in which the author is somewhat on the skeptical side, which I thought would be maybe a good counterbalance. I like to be as objective as possible and present as realistic a picture as I can of situations, and since I'm personally not familiar with co-living, I have to rely on what I can find out in the world. So most of what I've come across has been pretty positive, but this is a little bit of a skeptical article, so I'll discuss that here in a few minutes. As I said, this is KZZH. KZZH has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County, California by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. You can leave feedback for me at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage, or you can leave a voicemail anytime at 707-362-8000. I also try to remember as much as I can to mention my motto here at the Roommate Coach, which is world peace, one roommate at a time. Before I get into the topic for this episode, I'll just do a quick update on recent plans and developments, things I've been working on. The big topic, as any regular listeners probably are aware of, as I've been talking for some time now about interviews, these mythical interviews which I intend to bring to the site in order to break up the monotony of just my one lone voice droning on here endlessly. And I have taken some pretty significant steps, although as you can tell, I still don't have an interview because right now it's just me. But I have begun contacting people, and I guess the best way to find out what the potential difficulties are in doing something is to go ahead and do it, or attempt to do it. I've sent what I think is a pretty nice email request to a potential interviewee. Anyway, long story short is it looks like my emails are being trapped in the spam folders, so I have to figure out an alternate way to contact. At least in this situation, the only thing I had was an email. So bottom line is the interviews are not quite a reality yet, but hopefully that will change in the very near future as I deal with the various difficulties. It's actually kind of tricky in this world to make direct contact with someone that you don't already know, just because, as we all know, there are so many where we're all constantly being set upon by someone wanting something from us. So our society seems to have set up ways to kind of keep the world at a distance. But anyway, that's the interview situation. That will change soon, I hope. The other thing that is something I've added to my website, and anyone listening to the show is certainly welcome to come to the website. In fact, I encourage people to. I'm going to start regular online, and by online I mean telephone audio only conference call type live conversations. The idea is, everything I'm talking about, especially the roommate difficulties and all that, these are kind of tricky topics. It's the kind of thing that we all know it exists, that sometimes we have trouble getting along with each other, and at the same time we'd sort of wish it wasn't so. We'd sort of like to just pretend it's not that way. So I think the nature of the topic lends itself to real-time back and forth conversation. If anyone has questions or curiosities about some of my thinking, or maybe they disagree, or maybe they'd like to understand more clearly how something might work. So with this in mind, I've set up a weekly, I'm going to start out with weekly and see how that goes. Just a weekly conference call where anyone who's interested can call in, and maybe we'll get a little conversation going. We'll see how that works. The details for this can be found on the website. If you go to theroommatecoach.com, at the top of every page, you'll see a little graphic that says Open House. If you click on the Open House, you'll get to a page where you can enter your email address, and the system will immediately send you details for calling in, what the numbers and contact information is. So that's a recent development. I'm also advertising this online, so hopefully I'll be able to get some callers from who knows where. We'll see how that works out. Okay, so on to the main part of today's episode, which I'm referring to as the Skepticism. A little bit of background. I'm referring to a form of shared housing. And without shared housing, there would be no roommates, and there'd be no roommate coach. So my whole world, in a sense, is the world of shared housing. And within that world, there are a number of relatively recent developments. One form of shared housing that has become fairly popular in recent years is called coliving. Now, it's not really brand new. It's people sharing spaces and basically sharing rooms and having a common area. I mean, boarding houses or room for rent in someone's home with access to the home itself. That has been around for generations, if not longer. But in recent years, the concept has been kind of polished up, and a number of companies, it seems like more and more every day, are offering some version of this format of shared housing where you basically have a private room in a larger home, or maybe even you'd call it a building. It's almost like hotel living is what some people are saying, except with a permanent private room. And it's really interesting and supposedly very useful for young people just getting started in a big expensive city, where if the rents are really high in big city like Manhattan, like San Francisco, for example, rather than being stuck getting a real expensive apartment and finding roommates on Craigslist or wherever, and then being kind of all alone in the big city other than maybe the one or two people you happen to live with. Well, with the co-living model, you have an instant community. You have a whole building full of people, and I guess the larger operations arrange for events, and it's instant community and instant personal network, in addition to hopefully saving some money, although I guess the amount of financial benefit can vary depending on the situation. Well, as far as the particular, again, as mentioned before, the various shared housing formats that I'm talking about on the Roommate Coach series here seem to be catching on, seem to be more popular in Europe and other parts of the world than here. This particular article that I just saw the other day, it's just written late June of this year, so just a few weeks ago actually, is discussing a relatively new, really good-sized co-living operation in London, England. And the operation is called The Collective, kind of an interesting name. And apparently it accommodates 550 people, or maybe it has 550 rooms. I'm not sure. In any event, it's really quite good size, much larger than the ones I've seen advertised and mentioned in this country, although I imagine larger ones are here as well. So the article is written by a fellow named Tom Harrod, Harrad, and it's an online publication I hadn't seen before. I'll leave a link in the show notes, which you can get to on theroommatecoach.com. If you go to there's a radio link on the homepage, and then you can access each series. This is episode 23, and I'll put a link to this article if anyone's interested. The publication is called id.vice.com. I guess it's a British publication. This particular article is called "This New Co-Living Space is the Dystopian Symptom of a London Failing Young People." Now, I've just read the article. I don't know anything about the author, although I'm toying with the idea of maybe contacting him for an interview. I don't know if I'll follow through on that or not. But he has written a fairly well-written article and somewhat lengthy, and he's pretty negative about the whole thing. So I thought I would discuss that a little bit and take a look at some of his apparent reasons for negativity. And like I said earlier, I'm offering this as maybe to kind of balance things out. A lot of the press, a lot of the things online discussing the co-living operations are written pretty much by the co-living operators themselves. So it's kind of like asking the barber if you need a haircut. Well, naturally, they're not going to be entirely objective. Now, again, I have no reason to think that there's anything wrong with any of these operations. It sounds like some of them are, in fact, very well done, and the fact that they're so popular indicates that people are writing checks, that which is the most sincere form of flattery, I guess you'd say, when someone pays for the service. So this is not meant as any kind of a condemnation whatsoever, as much as just an alternate viewpoint and sort of taking a look at the bigger picture. You're listening to The Roommate Coach, episode 23. I'm calling this Skepticism. I'm Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach, and this is KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air here in Eureka by Access Humboldt. They can be reached at accesshumboldt.net. If you'd like to leave any feedback for me for the Roommate Coach, you can do that online at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage. And you could also leave a voicemail 24/7 at 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. The motto here at the Roommate Coach is world peace, one roommate at a time. In the case of the collective, the large co-living operation I'm discussing that's recently opened in London, England, I guess it would be 550 roommates. It sounds like a really good-sized operation. So, okay, technically I guess they would be housemates. You have to allow for a little bit of flexibility in my definition here, but people that you're sharing living space with. But as our world seems to edge closer and closer to some kind of massive conflict, I like the idea of doing whatever I can in some small way to try to stem the tide and try to move things in the other direction, even on a small scale. Then again, as I like to say, if your world consists of where you live, and that world becomes more peaceful as a result of figuring out better ways to interact with your roommates or your housemates or your flatmates, I guess they say in England, then your world has become more peaceful. Well, since I've begun this particular episode, I have gone back and reread the article I'm referring to in a little more detail, a little more slowly, you might say. And I'm coming to realize that I really don't agree all that much with the overall point the author seems to be making. I was initially drawn to the article because I have my own, I guess skepticism is a fair word, or skepticism, curiosity. I mean, the claims that are being made by the co-living industry for life being wonderful for their inhabitants sound really good. And I think we all know that businesses in general have a tendency to maybe be a little bit optimistic in the claims they make for the products and the results of dealing with them. So because of that and my own skepticism, I was initially drawn to this article thinking, well, okay, maybe this guy's got some inside information. I think the article will be useful for me because it's going to help me to clarify some of my own skepticism and the reasons for it, and maybe even more importantly, some ideas I have that might help to I get the nice thing about positive offerings and positive statements made by companies. What would really be nice would be if they in fact delivered the goods, if the results were in fact every bit as beneficial as they were claimed to be, and if there is any gap in that situation right now, maybe there are some things that could be done to improve it. So anyway, without any further banter here, I'll get into the article. The early on in this article, and the format or the background for the article is this fellow, Tom Herod, apparently decided that he wanted to investigate. I guess he lives in the vicinity of this large operation in England, the collective, and he was curious about it, so he came up with a reason to get shown around. Apparently, I get the impression that he sort of posed as a prospective tenant and arranged for what would you call a walkthrough, for a demonstration, and he wrote up about that experience. So early on in the article, he kind of tips his hand. You can sort of tell that it's not going to be a glowing review of his experience. In the beginning of the walk around the demonstration that he's being given, he is shown the game room. I guess one of the big selling points of the whole co-living type of shared housing is that the facilities offer large common areas where you have access to the area and you presumably are able to interact with the other residents of the building, and they encourage the community. That part of it sounds like a great idea. So in this particular place, in the collective, this big operation, 550 rooms in London, England, the author, I'll quote here, he says, "We walk into a long, blindingly lit room with a checkerboard paneled floor and Space Invaders wallpaper. It has the clinical tang of a hospital waiting area, even though it's meant to be a games room." End quote. Well, all of that is obviously entirely subjective, and it would be hard to really argue the truth or falsity of that statement. So that was kind of, this is in like the third paragraph or so in the article, so this is where I begun to suspect that sort of sounds like maybe this guy just has an axe to grind. So he goes on and he looks around the facility and has a few more things to say, and not necessarily negative things, but he doesn't seem to be terribly impressed with the facility. But it's about a third of the way into the article that he really sort of comes clean as far as his viewpoint, and this is where he and I part company philosophically. I'll quote part of the paragraph here. He says, "That's what the collective is really selling here, belonging. Their Facebook advert reads, 'Be part of something.' Development projects like co-living are a symptom of a city failing young people, a city without rent controls or easily available social housing, a city of closing clubs, alternative venues, and libraries, a city where people feel priced out, isolated, and directionless. Co-living supposedly offers an antidote, a cozy, enclosed world filled with thrusting new friends and electronic distractions, warm and bustling with activity, all removed from the grime of the street." End quote. Now that's a really interesting little bit of the article right there. And some of it is certainly understandable. I mean, we all know that there's a lot to be said, not entirely positively, about our big cities. And I guess by our, I mean the world. This happens to be in England, but a lot of his complaints could be made about big cities in the U.S. as well. So apparently operations like the Collective and other co-living operations are trying to come up with an alternative to some of the problems in our big cities, such as the isolation and not to mention the crazy, outrageous high prices. Well, this particular fellow seems to think that somehow all of this good stuff that we all need should somehow just be provided, pretty much should be provided for free. And his main concern, or his main objection to the co-living operations such as the Collective, seems to be that they are hoping to get paid for their efforts in coming up with alternatives. So this is a big philosophical departure, and this is where he and I definitely part company. You're listening to The Roommate Coach, episode 23. I'm calling this episode Skepticism. My name's Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. You can leave me feedback at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage, or you could leave a voicemail 24/7 at 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. And you're listening to The Roommate Coach on KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. The bumper music is called Rollin' at 5, and that's by Kevin MacLeod. I also like to mention that the motto here at the Roommate Coach is World Peace, one roommate at a time. So to back up a little bit and perhaps reframe the issue here regarding this fairly negative and skeptical article about the whole co-living thing, I think one way to look at it would be that the issue is the impact of the co-living type operations, such as the really large one the author is talking about over in London, the one called the Collective with 550 rooms. The impact, the relationship, if any, between these co-living operations, which admittedly are for-profit business enterprises, and the underlying problem which the author discusses, and I recognize, I think a lot of us do, of the somewhat sad state in many ways of many large cities in the world, not just over in England, but in this country as well. The alienation, the excessively high prices, he didn't specifically mention crime, but that's part of it. And so the issue is, what is the relationship between the co-living operations and the problematic state of some of the big cities? The author seems to think that the co-living operations are maybe even part of the problem, certainly not any kind of a solution, and maybe even on a deeper level, he seems to be implying that the desire of the co-living people to turn a profit, that somehow that's part of the problem as well. Now, I don't agree with that aspect of it, but I will practice what I preach as the roommate coach. I believe problems can be helped by trying to find common ground. So what is the common ground that I might have between my way of seeing things and the author of this article? What is the overlap? And it turns out there is plenty of overlap. I definitely agree with him that the life in our big cities has become a lot less palatable than it could be and arguably should be. I can kind of agree with his frustration that the co-living operations, it's not so much that they are not all by themselves fixing the problem, which I don't think it's fair to expect them to. The problem is a lot larger than any particular housing facility, I would imagine. But he seems to feel that by more or less ignoring the underlying problem and just trying to find a way to make a buck out of the situation, that somehow this is not such a great move on the part of the co-living people. No, I apologize in advance. This is entirely my own interpretation. I could be mistaken. I'm not trying to condemn anyone here, just giving my opinion about an article. And I can kind of understand his thinking, and I partially agree. I am also somewhat frustrated in our society when companies come along and just pretty much jump in and do their darndest to, I don't want to say take advantage of a situation, but it really is kind of a fine point. I'm thinking, this might seem a little far-fetched, but I'm thinking of IKEA. Now, I like IKEA in many ways, although there are some things about their store design that I used to find annoying when I would shop there. IKEA does a great job of making really inexpensive furniture and making it available to people that probably wouldn't be able to afford, in many cases, the more expensive version. But my frustration with IKEA, which I think is somewhat along the lines of this fellow's frustration with the co-living operations, is that it almost seems like the companies are trying to say, hey, everything's great. Just use our product and everything will be fine. And as Ayn Rand would say, dropping the context, just tuning out entirely the much larger issue of, hey, more and more people, here's an entire generation of people that simply can't afford really good furniture, so we'll give them not so good furniture and convince them that it's terrific. Well, a generation or so ago, before the prices went crazy in the big city, people moving to the big city could afford a place to live. Well, now they can't afford a place to live, so we'll give them a partial place to live and convince them that they're better off than ever. And to that extent, I kind of agree. I don't care for the somewhat subtle manipulation that seems to be going on. Now, having said all that, I try to keep these to around half an hour, and I'm pretty close right now, so I've only got a couple of minutes to deliver on something I mentioned earlier in the show, which was maybe some suggestions on how the companies could, in fact, come closer to really delivering on their promise. And I'll talk more about this in a future episode, but I'm specifically thinking about the community aspect of what the co-living operations are hoping to provide. I think this is an absolutely great move on their part, and it's not the co-living operators' fault that the big city is a difficult place and the alienation and all the problems that we all know exist. They can't be held to blame for that. But whatever they can do, and by they I mean the various operators of all the co-living facilities, the ones that are including the social aspect, they all seem to be emphasizing the social aspect of their facilities. And I think if this turns out to be something that genuinely they really mean it, and they really do everything they possibly can to encourage the community to make the social aspect as real as possible. And just as a little bit of a background to my own skepticism here, I'm thinking of the food corporations in this country that probably a generation or so ago discovered that Americans, people in general, were wanting more healthy food, wanting natural food. So within a very short time, almost every food product on the shelf had the word natural somewhere in the labeling, even though in many cases nothing had changed and it didn't really mean anything. So this is my hope for the co-living industry, is that they will really do whatever they can. And I do think there are things that could be done to make the community aspect as likely as possible and as real as possible in terms of the genuine benefits for those living there. As I play back portions of this episode to check the sound quality and everything, I realize that my own position sounds somewhat undecided, and I guess that's accurate. I guess I am more ambivalent than I initially thought, as far as I am at least in partial agreement with what this guy is saying, although certainly not entirely. I think I'm going to need to do a follow-up episode rather than just leave it hanging. I think there's quite a bit more to be said. But there is one little bit more from the article I want to quote, just because I think it's a really important, I would phrase it as a warning to the co-living industry. And I would preface it by saying, please don't do this if you're thinking about it, because the author brings up a possibility that had not occurred to me. And let's see, this is about 2/3 of the way through the article. He's talking about the future plans of the property investment company in England. I guess the company is called Moda. Moda Living, apparently, is the developer of the collective. He says they have similar projects lined up in Manchester, Leeds, Glasgow, London, Birmingham, Liverpool, and Edinburgh. Moda's future tenants will enjoy, and he quotes, market-leading brand collaborations with renowned appliance, media, and lifestyle companies, end quote, within his quote, which I assume, and I'm still quoting him, which I assume means private companies literally walking into people's home and attempting to flog them stuff in their living rooms, end quote. Now, that had not occurred to me, and if not for the internet experience and Google and Facebook and many of the other things we've had, I think we've all seen I would consider excessive attempts on the part of many, many, many internet marketers to just go absolutely overboard in selling their stuff, not to say shoving it down our throats. I personally find it extraordinarily annoying to log in to my browser and suddenly be shown a million ads for stuff that I happen to search for. It honestly hadn't occurred to me that there could be a real world version of this kind of thing because of the corporate nature. And I guess that's the real concern I have, is the over corporatization of life. And I think that's what he's talking about in the article, that, yeah, if a company winds up having lots and lots of co-living operations and they have thousands of people living there, what's to stop them from having some corporate tie-in with the companies that are selling things? And you come home from a long day at work, and since the common area by definition is under control of the operator of the building, if they have agreed that the particular event for that evening is going to be some kind of demonstration of really cool products from one of their corporate partners, well, that's not entirely far-fetched, given what we're all living through on the internet and why so many people investigate ad blockers and all the other things we're trying to do. So that's where the author of this article and I definitely overlap. So anyway, I apologize. This probably has been somewhat of a rambling type episode, but I think I may have touched on a really important topic here, and I will continue in a future episode. I don't know if it'll be the very next episode or not, but I will continue this. But for now, I'd better wrap this up. I'm already pretty well over my half hour. So once again, you've been listening to The Roommate Coach. This has been episode 23, and I've been calling this Skepticism. And you're also listening to KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air here by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. My name is Mark Lynn. I'm the roommate coach, and I'm also the guy that brings up complicated issues about the entire shared housing phenomenon, including co-living, which is a worldwide thing, as this article illustrates. This is all about a big co-living operation in London, with many more on the planning table, apparently. But anyway, you could leave me feedback at theroommatecoach.com. There's a contact link on the homepage. You can also find prior shows there's a radio link on the homepage, and the article I've discussed in this episode, I will put a link to that in the show notes for this particular show. This is episode 23. You can also leave feedback on a voicemail system anytime. That's at 707-362-8000. 707-362-8000. The motto is world peace, one roommate at a time. And I guess if you live in the collective in London, that could be 550 roommates at a time. But in any event, I have enjoyed talking to you once again, and I hope you're enjoying the shows, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon. So thanks so much for listening.